Hello, welcome to another how to paint cars tutorial. Today I'm going to do my first Japanese car. Well overdue time, to be honest with you. I've done French cars, German cars, Italian, Swedish, American, British of course, and yet not yet done a Japanese car. So that's why today we're going to paint the Toyota Celica, the first version thereof from about 1970. Okay, so for once I've started there with just that straight line, which is going to be the edge of the bonnet. Okay, and underneath that I've started putting the headlights, doubled headlights like the Citroen D Special, which I did a little while ago. The Toyota Celica, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to burble on for a bit while taking you through the various stages. The Toyota Celica, I thought, is an interesting name. There we are. If you can now put the doubled headlights on the right hand side of the car, so it's the left hand side of the car which is actually facing towards us, and then start sketching in that bumper, but don't take the bottom edge of the bumper all the way. The top edge of the bumper is really easy because it just goes from one set of headlights curving, slanting slightly upwards to join with the right hand headlights there. But the name Celica, as I say, it's interesting because the idea behind the Celica was similar to the Ford Mustang, which I made a painting of the other day. It's the idea of this very sporty sports coupe sort of thing, and it's one of quite a number of cars which you feel were probably inspired by the success of the Mustang. The Celica, in a couple of ways, when we look at the rear of it, it reminds me just a tiny bit of Ford of Europe's Capri model, which was very popular once upon a time. Okay, so if you put the number plate in there, in that hole we left in the middle of the front bumper. So the name, rather than going for anything which was too obvious, I mean, it's not difficult to know why Ford chose the name Ford Mustang, for example. Celica is actually derived from the Latin word coelica, which is Coelica, which literally means heavenly. I mean, coela, I believe, if I remember my schoolboy Latin, was sort of like the sky, the heavens. You know? Now, to the left of the bumper, can you see there's just that little rectangular side light in there? And also, if you look at the license plate, the number plate, that extends beyond the bottom of the bumper, and then you've got those two bits of the bottom of the car which join up. Actually, they're not bits of the bottom of the car, they're actually holes, but we'll come to that. In fact, we'll come to that now, as you can see. So can you see now underneath the headlight, furthest right headlight, so it's the one of those pair of headlights on the right, which is actually on the right hand side. I've drawn that like rhombus shape, parallelogram underneath inside the bumper. Well, underneath the bottom right hand edge of that, that's where you can start drawing the line of the bottom edge of the car. Take it slanting down to the left, just underneath the level of the license plate, and then a very slightly curving line, and it doesn't really matter if you do it as a full straight line, down to underneath where the bottom left hand edge of the bumper starts curving round, and then that too can curve round, but with a less exaggerated curve. Okay, I did the right hand edge of the bonnet as well. Now look at it there, because it is curved, but it's almost a straight slant from the right until it's almost above the headlights, but not quite, and then it curves down to meet the bottom edge and to meet the radiator. Can you see I've also put that little mirror, which is some distance above the left hand set of headlights there. Now, if you take the bottom edge of the car, which you drew in the previous slide, we're going to draw the wheel arch now. Now, I always tend to draw the wheel arch in stages. So I do the line which joins up with the bottom of the car first on the right, and then curving up and to the left. Now the apex of the wheel arch is pretty flat there, and that's on about a level, it's about the same height from the bottom of your page as the bottom line of the bonnet or the hood, just above the top of the headlights there. And then that gradually, it slants downwards very, very slightly and gradually curves round. I've also put in the first line of the front tyre as well, really just to give me a bit of a guideline there. I've never owned a Toyota. I don't think I've even driven one. I have owned a Japanese car once, and I'll tell you about that in a minute. So what I'd like you to do now, we're going to do the left hand edge of the bonnet or the hood, the wing there, and that is almost parallel to the top of the wheel arch. Its slant should be slightly more, and I only mean slightly more, than the right hand edge of the bonnet, and that goes to some way past the wheel arch there, and then you can draw that curving line down, which is going to be the edge of the door, about to the same place. Imagine if you drew a line from the bottom of the wheel arch just slanting upwards, because we're going to use that as the bottom of the door, and that's going to carry on for the side of the car there. Can you see I've actually taken the bottom edge of the side of the car from just beneath where the front tyre meets the wheel arch, and you can extend, I'd extend those pencil lines and see what it looks like and work on from that. So yes, I did own a Japanese car. I owned a Mitsubishi Space Wagon. So here you can see we've just done a pretty straight line with only a very, very slight convex curve to it, joining up the right hand edge of the bonnet, top right hand edge of the bonnet to the top left hand edge of the bonnet. And I say bonnet, that's because we call what we call it in Britain. In other places they call it the hood. Okay. I had to own a Mitsubishi Space Wagon because I have 5 children, and a normal saloon or estate car, we couldn't get them all in there. So I bought a Space Wagon, and unfortunately it was old. It was getting on a bit. In fact, it was getting on a lot, and the problems came when things started not exactly falling off, but things stopped working on it, and I couldn't believe how expensive the parts for it were. Now if you look on the above the curving vertical line to the left of the wheel arch where it joins the bonnet there, can you move slightly upwards and slightly to the left, and we're going to do the edge of the windscreen or windshield there. Now you know how this works. If you've done one of these cars with me before, you know that almost always the slant on the edge of the bonnet, which is closest to us, the viewer, is less pronounced than the slant on the opposite edge, and you can see it here. The slant on the right, the windshield, starts just beside the mirror we drew and slants upwards to the left, and I would say almost a 45-degree angle, maybe slightly more than 45, but you know, I'd say that's pretty good. Whereas it's much less pronounced on the right hand side. It's still, you can clearly see it's slanting upwards to the left, but by nothing like as much. So yeah, the Mitsubishi Space Wagon, what happened with that was the gearbox went. Now if you look, you can see that line, which is the top edge of the windscreen or windshield, that's almost a straight line joining up the two edges of the windscreen there. The gearbox went, and the garage and we contacted the Mitsubishi dealers, and basically this was a Mark I space wagon, and this was quite a few years ago. Basically, you could not buy a new gearbox. In fact, it was over 20 years ago, thinking about it, because I was living in the old house. You couldn't buy a new Mitsubishi Space Wagon gearbox, but you could buy a reconditioned one, but you had to give them your old one, and it cost over £1,000. Well, I hadn't paid £1,000 for the car in the first place, so that was an absolute non-starter. Now, if you look to the left of the left-hand edge of the windscreen, I've drawn two parallel lines with that, and that's the side windows. Slightly higher than the top edge of the windscreen they need to go, and then that line curving down from it towards the left, which is one of the things which makes this a more interesting car to look at. So basically, my wife and I got onto the phone, rang around a lot of dealers, and found one about an hour and a half away, a scrapyard, where they had actually taken the gearbox out of a space wagon, and it was working. So I borrowed my wife's stepfather's car, drove, picked it up, brought it back, and we fixed it. Now, can you see the top edge of the side window then curves round, and the curve becomes more pronounced to the back of the car, and then you've got that gorgeous curve round and down to the right, coming back up to join the window, and then about a third of its length along you have that pair of lines there, which make the window space we've just drawn into one large front window and very small side window, rear window there. And also draw the line of the door there. Now I put the roof in next because that curves so beautifully down to make the rear of the car, and this is one of the things which reminds me of the Ford Capri a little bit, which I mentioned earlier. Coming back to the space wagon, it wasn't that long after it that I needed a whole new front axle for it. Front wheel fell off, which again was a shame, but you know, it needs must when the devil drives. But I don't think it got past its MOT within a year, and that was it really. So can you see that curve of the roof line? It's a more pronounced curve even than the curve of the top edge of the side windows. And I also drew in the handle of the door there. It's not looking bad now. So a couple of details from the handle of the door. I just drew those lines showing a little bit of curve of the bodywork. And can you see how the rear end of the car works? You know, once the line of the roof has come right down as far as it's going to go, there's that almost straight line slightly to the left, and then the slanting vertical line slanting away and curving to the left as well, which just gives us that rear of the car. And you can see, you know, what I mean by calling it a sporty coupe kind of car. Yeah, once the carry on with this story now, once the space wagon breathed its last and we got rid of it, we next bought a second-hand Renault Espace, which is another people carrier, but bigger than the space wagon. Now, I really liked the space wagon, and while it was working, it drove nicely. But this Espace, within a very short time, it started going bad on us. the engine just wasn't right, and there'd been my mechanic told me there'd been some bodged repairs done on it in the past. So we curve the rear of the car around there. Can you see I've just drawn a couple of lines to suggest the rear lights, but that curves in really nicely, you know, and I think there's a few things which really make the look of this car for me. The front bumper is one, but then the curving rear end as well is rather lovely, I have to say. Now, if you get to this point, you might just as well draw a line from the rear of the car meeting up with the bottom of the car where it meets just before the wheel arch there, and then you could draw in at least part and suggest the bottom of the door frame as well. When you draw the wheel arch, the rear wheel arch and wheel over it, you can just rub out the bits which you don't want after anyway. And there you go. So you can see you've got this, it's kind of like a capital J, which is the wrong way round, has been forced over onto its side, really, if you see what I mean. But yeah, the Espace, as I say, a lot of bodged work had been done on it in the past, which it got to the stage where it was just silly to keep spending more and more money on it, especially since my oldest kids were getting of an age where they weren't going to want to be coming out with us all the time anyway. So basically that was it. That was when I got rid of the Espace, and it was the last time in which I bought a people carrier. So 2 wheels in now. I say the 2 wheels, these are actually the hubcap parts of the wheels. I decided to do those ovals first. Now again, if you've done this before with me, you'll know what I'm about to say next. The oval of the rear wheel hubcap is going to be much thinner than the oval in the front wheel hubcap, because that's what happens when we start playing with perspective. And there you go. I've drawn in the details which aren't covered by the wheel arches. You might find it easier when you draw the whole complete oval going right through the wheel arch and rub out what you don't want. And that might be easier. You notice I haven't done the bottom of the front tyre, and I rarely do, to be honest with you, because that's where a bit of shade with the painting is going to come in. And there really isn't a great amount more to do with this outline. The suspension at the bottom of the front of the car, and also the left-hand tyre, sorry, the right-hand tyre in this case. And I think we're pretty much done and ready to start applying paint. And there you go. So, you know me, I like to go fling not exactly the whole contents of my set of watercolour paints at the tyres and wheel arches, but I do like to have a bit of a mix of colour going on, because where you're painting a car which is all one colour, you haven't necessarily got that opportunity. So you can see I've used yellow, I've used ochre, I've used grey, I've used light blue, I've used violet, all on the tyres and the wheel arches, and I've also splattered some of those colours on. You can see reds, crimson, purple, blue in the splatter. And there you go. So the bodywork of the Celica is all this blue. I painted a very light blue to start with and progressively darkened areas of that with second and third coats. A bit of wrinkling going on with the paper there below the side door, which is a bit of a shame, but I do think we managed to do something about that. Also used it's a combination of green and grey on the front tyre. The car's starting to look a lot better now. The bodywork is still not brilliant, and unfortunately with this picture it never will be. I'm just never entirely happy with what I've got. I used a light grey, a mixture of my grey green which I'd used before. on top of some very light yellow on the interior there. You notice I hadn't drawn the interior in this time before painting it. I actually think that works quite well. So the interior is not looking too bad. I also darkened, used a much darker grey, almost black, on the suspension, and also applied some to the right hand front tyre. Much lighter grey, I did some work on the front bumper and also the radiator grille. Now by this stage I've taken out my brush pens and used two different blues actually on the side, and tried to blend the lighter highlights and the darker areas in, and it's better than it was. It's still not perfect. I've also done some work on the bonnet, on the hood there, which you can see. Okay, I decided that the interior needed to be a lot darker, so I used the black brush pen on this, spreading the colour darker through the windscreen itself than on the side windows. Also used a darker blue on the wheel arch, and then black on the edges. Used the fine liner for some shadow around the license plate, the number plate, and also the top edge of the bumper. And I've also drawn in details of the hubcaps on both wheels, especially on the front wheel. More shadows around the front wheel, and also dark areas on the rear wheel. I've used the fine liner to outline the windows and the windscreen. Also did some work on the shadows on the headlights and also on the mirror. Now the obvious thing there was the amber for the side lights. And they're nearly a finish because I've used the black to put in the whole of the radiator grille now. Done a little bit more darkening on the front wheel arch too, although this was quite subtly done. And there we are, that's the finished car. I've tried to blend the blues on the side as well as possible, but I didn't want to lose the highlights either. So you have your Toyota Celica. I'll be honest with you, it is not my favourite of the pictures I've made, and I don't think it's the best done, but hey, you know, it's not bad. And at least that adds my first Japanese car to the collection. Now, as with all of the tutorials in this series, there is a link on the description of the video, and that will take you to the outline version of this picture. And if you want to download it so that you or your kids or whoever can do your own version and colour it in, then please be my guest and feel free. So all that remains is for me to take you very quickly through the stages of making this picture and to thank you for watching. And if I don't get a chance to say at the end, if you like it, please like and subscribe to my channel. 3, 2, 1.